Hello, welcome back to my haunted library and welcome to week 2 of Vamptember. So last week I talked about going to thrift stores and finding some wonderful vampy items, and something that really spoke to me at one of my thrift stores was this little doll. I'll show you here. I named her Veronica, just sitting on the shelf, and I'm like, I have to have this doll, and she was only $3, so it was quite a bargain. So I decided to turn little Veronica into a creature of the night. I'm just going to show you the before and now the after. Yes, I turned her into Eddie Munster, and I don't know, she might not be too happy about it. But at the end of this video, I'm going to show you my little Patreon video that I posted. Being a patron is a great way to support my channel, by the way, because I don't run ads on my videos. And it's a fun thing I try to keep up with every week by throwing up a vlog about whatever I'm doing and just keep it kind of laid back and casual. So in that video, I'll put it at the end of this program, I'll show you how I transformed her into this. And I was thinking maybe I'll dye her clothes black, but that might be taking a little too far. I think I can get it off with nail polish remover if I need to transform her back, because I just used acrylic paint, but this was a lot of fun. I'm going to put her here for now, but she has her own place on the shelf, and I gave her a little skull to play with, so she's very happy. So let me know what artwork you've been working on if you're doing Vamptember. I'd love to hear from all of you. And I also wanted to shout out a channel that I was not aware of until she tagged me in her video, because she's participating in Vamptember. Hooray! This is The Secret of Nym, I think, or Nime, N-Y-M. She's a small booktuber, and she's lovely, and she's participating in Vamptember. So make sure you check out her channel. It's linked below. We always love to spread the love here at the Haunted Library. So what have I been reading for Vamptember? Well, I'm about halfway through this book, Night Thirst by Patrick Whalen. So this book, I almost DNF'd it because I started reading it and realized it was actually a sequel. And will I understand it if I don't read the first book? But I'm getting into it. It's kind of like an 80s vampire Rambo movie. It's like an action vampire story. This book has nothing to do with this, what I expected based on this cover. Okay, so I'm calling this video All of My Vampires, and I'm going to get to the Salem's Lot read-along discussion in a minute, but I wanted to mention my own books and plug my own books for a second, because I've written several vampire stories, and for the month, no, all of spooky season, sorry, my books, including the HorrorTube anthologies, are only 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. So it's a bargain. You can read any of my books or the anthologies. And I also have some short stories up there too. I have my pumpkin spice coffee from Wawa, so I'm going to take a little sip of this. All right, so the first book that I wrote, it's a novella with a vampire theme, is something that's very close to my heart that hardly anyone's read or reviewed, and that's Out for Blood. Out for Blood, I wrote it maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I didn't have a very big platform, so I really didn't, and I didn't have a lot of promotion, but it's a good novella, and I've been wanting to go back to it and turn it into a movie script because I really love the story. I set out to write a scary vampire story. So I wanted my vampire to be like a disgusting beast, and he is. He's actually an alien vampire who's conceived when this couple is doing it in the weeds one day, and this green cloud passes over and rains down on them, and this vampire beast is conceived by his mother, who's living in a trailer park and very poor. So she keeps him in a hole in the ground beneath the trailer, and he grows up in this horrible environment. He's a vampire who does the typical vampire thing when he bites people, but he also can shape shift and body snatch. I think this story has a lot of potential. The book might not be perfect, it might not be perfectly edited, but it is a great story if you want to check it out, and it's a very short read. All right, next, I wrote a book called Ravenscroft Hall, which is actually one of my bestsellers. It is a gothic romance with a vampire twist. And when I wrote this book a few years ago, I set out to write a book, a gothic romance, based on the book that Dean Koontz put out about writing genre fiction. This came out in the 70s. I did a video about it. He breaks down how to write in particular genres like westerns and mystery, gothic, because he, of course, is a prolific writer. Early in his career, he wrote gothic romance under a pen name. And he wrote a lot of things under different pen names, I believe. And I followed his formula, and I think it worked because a lot of people really love that book. Yeah, so definitely check out Ravenscroft Hall. A lot of people like that one. Probably my most popular vampire story, and probably the one that I think I would recommend to read as one of my better works, as far as it's more polished. It's one of my more recent ones. I'm hoping that I'm getting better as a writer. But this one is called Code Red. It's a vampire story, small town vampire story, but it's also an asylum story. It's about a boy who's brought to this specialized mental hospital in the Southwest Virginia, so it's in coal country. He's admitted to this hospital because he believes he's a vampire. His parents think he's just on drugs, but it turns out he is a vampire, and soon this town that's cut off because of floodwaters takes the bridge out, and this town is trapped with these vampires. It's a humorous story. It has some like fun characters in it. I have a sheriff and an old man named Silas Cooter, and the sheriff and the old man kind of get together with his granddaughter and her boyfriend, and they're always fighting, the girl and the boyfriend, and they make an unlikely band of vampire hunters. I think it's a lot of fun. People seem to like it. So Code Red, I recommend. The last book, and this is something that's an ongoing story that I am developing for Kindle Vella. I went back to Vella because I thought this story works on that platform pretty well, and it's an ongoing story. I started writing it on Wattpad. I'm like, I'm going to put it on Vella because people really like vampire romances and paranormal romances. So that's what this is, and that's called Blood Brother. And it's about a young interior designer who gets an assignment to go to this beautiful mansion. That's an old rundown mansion. Of course, we got some tropes. And she gets stuck in a snowstorm and gets rescued by a weird but handsome guy who owns the castle, Jareth Ambrose, and his brother, Emilio. So it is a love triangle. It's sexy, it's fun, and I think you would like that too. And you can read the first couple episodes, I think first 3 episodes, for free on Kindle Vella. All of these works are going to be linked below. Okay, so now we get to Salem's Lot. I did watch the new trailer. It looks really cool. I love how they do the 70s music, the Gordon Lightfoot song Sundown. I thought was used perfectly in the trailer. It looks very dark. It looks well shot. I don't recognize any of the cast, but that's okay. I don't need to. I'm hoping they do it justice. Okay, let's move on to Salem's Lot. So I did make a bit of a mistake when I said that Ben Mears grew up in Salem's Lot. He spent a couple years there as a kid living with his aunt. So I didn't want to imply that he was like a townie, because a big part of the story is that the townspeople don't exactly trust him. I also wanted to mention, and I forgot to last time, is Part 1, The Marston House, begins after the prologue with a Shirley Jackson quote from The Haunting of Hill House. I'm just going to read it here because it is a really good piece of writing. So let's indulge it a little bit. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, the doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. I actually got a chill from that. It's so good. And of course, it's such a great book. All right, so chapter 5, Ben, part 2. Ben has dinner with the Nortons again. Susan and Ben are really getting into each other. The dad is cool. The mother doesn't really trust Ben. She doesn't want her daughter going with an artsy-fartsy writer type who's just going to break her heart and leave town. Ben asks Susan to come and get some ice cream with him. Again, a very kind of wholesome, small town kind of date. Well, it doesn't really turn out that way. They head to the park, and Susan says, Ben, make love to me, right here, on the grass. And Ben's like, sure, babe. So they do it. But it's like they're falling in love. You know, it's not just something like a one-night stand. This is getting serious. Ben tells Susan he is writing a book about the Marston house, and he wants to do research about Hubie Marston and how he was actually he worked for the mob as a hitman in the 30s. He enjoyed killing so much he wanted to kill children for his own amusement. So the guy was a real sicko. So Ben wants to research this story about Marston and also about evil and how evil can attract more evil. Is the house evil? Did the house make him, Marston, evil? Or did Marston make the house evil? This is all the interesting things that Ben is exploring, and he tells Susan about it. And also because he had that psychic experience in the house as a child, so he's haunted by it. And he's thinking that, well, maybe this evil is now here, and this is what happened to these kids, the Glick brothers. Susan's like, I love you, Ben, and please, whatever you do, don't tell people in this town that you're writing a book about this house. Okay, so now Ben drops Susan off from their date and hangs out at the local watering house. And he runs into Weasel, Craig, and Matt Burt. Matt Burt is the local English teacher. Perhaps another Stephen King insert, because of course Stephen King was an English teacher before he became world-renowned writer. So he's actually has had quite a few teacher characters in his books, and as far as I'm concerned, and they usually are English teachers, I think. Matt asked Ben to stop by his classroom if he would and do a presentation to the students about what it is to be a writer. So Ben says, sure, that sounds great. Ben is still looking out the window at the Marston house before he falls asleep, haunted by this. All right, so now we get to chapter 6, The Lot Part 2. It is Danny Glick's funeral, a very sad event. We have Mike, the grave digger. We have Father Callahan doing the service. Hubert Marston's headstone is tilted over, some foreshadowing perhaps. Tony Glick, the dad, is so upset he throws himself into the grave. The mother faints. It's really a horrible scene. Mike is left to fill the grave, and this is a really, really good section of writing that King does, where Mike is being hypnotized by this unseen force, this evil force in the graveyard. And he kind of goes into a fugue state. Suddenly, Mike is compelled to jump into the grave, remove some of the dirt, open the grave, and you can guess what happens. Little Danny Glick's in there, and his eyes are open. Da-dun! All right, so then we see a little scene with Mark Petrie in his house. There's this ugly scene with Roy McDougal and his wife, where the wife continues to, and this happens earlier in the book, which I may not have mentioned it because there's so many characters going on, but she is abusing her baby, like hitting it and then pretending that it fell off out of the crib. So there's a sense of this evil brewing in these people's homes and these horrible things that are happening all over the town. So we've got Parkins still on the case, trying to figure out stuff about Ben Mears and also these two new men who've moved into town, Kurt Barlow and Straker. So he's finding out some things about them. Kurt Barlow is German, Straker's British. Who are these foreigners coming into our town, kind of thing. Now we're at the junkyard, and another really cool scene where Dud Rogers is at the dump. He's having all kinds of his own interior monologues about unsavory things, and this weird dude shows up and starts having a conversation with him. And Dud is really not into it. He's like, sir, the dump's closed. I just want to get home and have some beers. And the next thing you know, he's hypnotized Dud with a sexual fantasy about a girl named Ruthie Crockett, who's in Matt's high school class. And now we see a little scene with Father Callahan. So we're looking at all the different characters in the lot. He's feeling some real unease. He's drinking. He knows there's evil around him. He feels it. He's having a crisis of faith. So Ben and Matt part ways. Matt goes to Dell's to have a beer, runs into Mike, the gravedigger. Mike is not looking very good. In fact, he looks really sick. Matt assumes he's on drugs, something's wrong. Mike is passing out, so Matt decides to take Mike back to his house and let him sleep it off in one of his rooms. And Matt thinks, you know what, I'll take him to the doctor's tomorrow and help this guy out. But he also notices these strange marks on Mike's neck. And Matt starts thinking about vampires. He's starting to allow himself to actually have these thoughts. And I think King does a really good job, and this book is definitely a slow burn. And I'm really appreciating the masterful way that King lets the story slowly build in the minds of these townspeople. When something happens, like children disappearing in a small town, like if that happened, I live in a very small town. If that started happening in my town, I'm trying to imagine like how that would feel, the horror of that. At what point would you think vampires? Probably when you run into someone and they're acting weird and they have the marks on their neck. Like you were like, I know I'm crazy, but could it possibly be vampires? So Matt is starting to freak out. He's thinking, maybe I should call Ben Mears because we were talking about this stuff earlier. But what's that? I'm hearing some noises upstairs in my guest room. Sounds like the window's being pushed open. And now I'm hearing like some weird sucking sounds. And I am freaked out. So chapter 8 is actually the beginning of part 2. And basically Ben comes over to Matt's house. They look at Mike's body because they both determine that I think he's dead. Matt tells them what's going on. They start to talk vampires. Maybe we need to put a stake in his heart. What? We can't do that. We'll get arrested. You know, they're finally having some of these thoughts come out. So they decide to actually contact the authorities. So the sheriff comes over, the coroner comes over. They confirm, yeah, this guy's dead, Mike's dead. And together, Matt and Ben decide, you know what, we're going to go to the Marston house and start investigating. Okay, so at the end of that chapter and the section that we're reading, Ben decides the next day he's going to go out and talk to Susan and tell her everything. And he sees someone sitting in his car. And at first you think this has got to be Barlow because he's wearing a trench coat and a fedora. Well, it's actually Floyd Tibbetts, Susan's sort of boyfriend. And he says, "You're the son of a bitch that stole my girl. I'm going to kill you." I don't know why I'm giving these people in Maine a southern accent. I apologize for that. I really can't do a Maine accent, so I'm not going to try. And while Ben was still trying to clear all this through his central switchboard, Floyd Tibbetts waded in and boom. So next week, we're going to read Chapter 9, Susan Part 2, up to Part, whoops, here goes my dust jacket, up to Part 3, because this is when things start to really pick up. So I don't think you'll have any trouble continuing with this story and really enjoying it. So let me know in the comments below if you're reading Salem's Lot and or if you plan to watch the new show. I would love to hear your thoughts. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by the Haunted Library, and I'll see you soon. Bye! So you might remember last week I went by the thrift store and found this cute little creepy doll who was speaking to me, and I called her Veronica. So for the challenge for Vamptember about creating an art piece, I thought I would do a found object art piece by turning Veronica into a vampire baby. So I'm taking some white paint and making her a little paler, rubbing it in, kind of cleaning her up a bit. Very pretty. Now I'm just working to make her look creepier. So, oh, it's starting to work. What do you think? She definitely looks like she's becoming a little more possessed and perhaps turning into a baby vampire. And, oh, I added a creepy mouth. I feel like I'm really ruining this doll, but oh well, it's kind of fun. I hope she doesn't get too mad at me. Got to give her a little nail polish. A little while later, I've turned her into Eddie Munster, but I hope she doesn't mind too much. It was kind of fun to do this. Poor little Veronica. And here she is with her own little toy. I gave her a little toy sitting between my portraits of Poe and the Raven, and I think she makes a pretty good addition to my haunted library. What do you think?